And now on the line is Alice Dawson-Lyons, the Head of Communications and Campaigns at Oxfam Ireland. Alice, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Darren. Glad to be here.
Okay, Alice, today is the first time in a year and a half I've covered what is going on in South Sudan in an interview with Oxfam. Could you remind us of the background to what is happening in the country and then tell me how the situation has changed in the last year and a half?
Sure. So South Sudan is a relatively new country after recently gaining independence. But unfortunately, its independence has been plagued by almost 5 years of a brutal civil war, which has left the people of South Sudan facing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Throughout the conflict, civilians have been attacked, schools and hospitals have been looted and destroyed. Agriculture has been destroyed as well. People's source of livelihoods are gone. Over 4 million people, that's 1 in 3, have been forced to flee their home. And of these, 2 million have fled to neighbouring countries, which have welcomed them: Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, Uganda. But the most worrying and serious result is that over 7.1 million people, half the country's population, are estimated to be facing extreme hunger. So the crisis has made it hard for people to plant crops. It's disrupted their livelihoods in the market. And so as a result, over 7 million people are facing extreme hunger. So that's the situation currently in South Sudan. A peace agreement was signed in September, and there is new fragile peace, but there's still a very serious humanitarian crisis.
And is there a famine in the country, in any parts of the country?
No, not at the minute. In February 2017, famine was declared in 2 counties of former Unity State. 100,000 people were facing famine and 1 million were on the brink. A strong humanitarian response helps to keep that famine at bay. And so there currently is not famine, but that's not to say that people aren't facing extreme hunger, that famine is not a risk and needs to continue to grow. And people are very, very much at risk of extreme hunger.
And how many people have died through violence? And you mentioned there last year there was a famine declared. Overall, how many people have died, do you know?
Tens of thousands of people have been killed through the conflict. And the conflict is or was the main driver of humanitarian need, people being forced to flee. And then also just the disruption to the country's infrastructure and ways of working. So harvests are poor or non-existent. When people are forced to flee their homes, they lose their possessions, their crops, their income. They often get stranded in places where there aren't enough facilities to support them. Tens of thousands of new arrivals, and people aren't able to forge livelihoods that enable them to live in a sustainable way. And so then even when people were able to stay in their homes, the insecurity due to the conflict often meant that farming was too dangerous. So huge swathes of land were abandoned. So the conflict has not only taken the lives of tens of thousands of people, but it has destroyed the lives of millions. Basic necessities also became increasingly unaffordable, and more people were being forced to sell their assets as the economy plunged. In a 2017 World Food Programme study found that South Sudan was the most expensive place in the world to buy a basic meal relative to income. So the conflict, it's the main driver of the humanitarian crisis.
Alice, are you confident that if the peace agreement holds, that you'll be able to keep on looking after the people until there's more stabilisation?
I think the only thing that the South Sudanese need now is for this new fragile peace to remain and to take hold. Until then, organisations like Oxfam, we can only continue to slow the descent into deeper humanitarian crises. If the peace agreement was much anticipated, it was signed by both the government and armed opposition. It's the latest attempt to end the war, and ultimately that must hold, and both parties and the international community must do everything in their power to make sure that holds. Because without peace, aid agencies like Oxfam can only continue to stem the the flow of famine and hunger, people's livelihoods being destroyed, people being forced to flee. The catastrophe will only get worse. So I think we're confident if the peace holds, that there's a bright future for South Sudan.
Okay, and what are Oxfam doing on the ground in the country, Alice, and also on an international level?
So we've been in South Sudan for over 30 years. We have very strong and established teams in the country. Over the recent years and the hunger crisis, we've been working tirelessly from 12 bases across the country to hold back the worst effects of the conflict. Our humanitarian assistance looks like providing people with basic essentials: clean water, hygiene facilities, food, fuel, income support. So just enabling people, to survive through the conflict and humanitarian crisis. But as well as meeting people's most urgent needs, we're also trying to help people put themselves in a stronger position to survive the shocks of the war, and to now rebuild their life now that there is this fragile peace in place. So we've been training people on more productive farming techniques, developing business skills, and helping people to access education, so that they can rebuild their lives and create better, brighter futures for their families. So in the past year alone, we supported more than 600,000 people across those 12 bases in South Sudan.
You already answered this question. You might like to go into it a bit more detail. You're saying there that Oxfam were calling for the peace agreement to hold, so there's peace in the countries, people can get their lives back on track. That's what you're calling for at the moment, yeah?
Absolutely. We're calling for a permanent ceasefire, for peace to hold, for an end to violence, so that the country can rebuild and that people can rebuild their lives.